Hi guys, and welcome back to my video tutorial on le passé composé. This is part 2, and in part 2 we're going to be looking at verbs that take être in the past tense and also how to form negative with le passé composé. So just to remind you of the overall objective of this session, we're looking at building our confidence in producing the passé composé, the past tense, with regular and irregular verbs. I'll be using my graphics tablet again, and there will be a chance for you to pause the video at the end of the session to do an exercise, which I'll then go through after with feedback. So let's begin. Just to recap on what we went through in part 1, the past tense is in 3 parts in French: the pronoun, the auxiliary verb, which is either avoir or être, and the past participle, which is 3 different changes depending on whether it's an ER verb. It goes to E accent, RE verbs go to U, and IR verbs go to I. And then we just also went through that some of these verbs just on the right hand side are irregular and have their own past participles. So moving on to the past tense, passé composé in the negative form. So I'm going to take my pen. Now, as you know, you should recognise this. This is what we use in French to negate a verb. Ne pas, for example, I play. I'll use the verb jouer again. I play is je joue. And usually in here, the verb is going to go. We're going to sandwich that verb. We're going to put ne on one side and pas on the other. So we're going to put ne here and pas here. So we get our ne pas. This now becomes I don't play. Okay, so je joue would be I play, je ne joue pas is I don't play. Now it's going to be slightly different in the past because we're going to have another part of the verb. So if we had, let's use tu as joué. That's you have played or you played. So you might be asking yourself, well, where does the ne and pas go in here? Because we've got the pronoun, we've got the auxiliary verb, and we've got the past participle. Now, where it goes here is in between the auxiliary verb, okay? So for the past tense, the auxiliary verb is going to go here. So what we're going to do is we're going to put our ne here and our pas here. Now what actually happens though is we've got a vowel here, so the E and the A don't really get on, they clash. So the final result of this is going to be N apostrophe AS, then we're going to have our pas, then we're going to have our past participle like this. Tu n'as pas joué. Okay, we don't put the pas at the end of the sentence. We sandwich this auxiliary verb here so that it's in between the a here. Another example: if we had nous avons joué, that would be we played this time. We find our auxiliary verb, which is here. We take our N apostrophe and we put our pas here. Now that becomes we didn't play instead of we did play or we played. Okay, so that is how we form the negative with the passé composé. So moving on to our être verbs here. So as I said, there's only a select group, about 13 or 14 verbs that take être in the past tense, and these are the verbs. You might be asking, why have we got a very strange, odd-looking woman here? Well, it's just a reminder, there's a mnemonic in French, which is a word, sort of a word trick that helps you to remember certain verbs. And there's various permutations of this. I like to use Mrs. Vandetramp. So as you can see here down in red, we've got the person Mrs. Vandetramp. And each one of these letters actually stands for a different verb, the first letter of each verb. So M for monter, R for retourner, S for sortir, etc., etc. It's just a way of remembering the verbs that use être in the past. So we're going to go through what they mean first. So I'm going to get my pointer. Monter is... Now before I do that, there's actually another way of remembering. There's 2 little tricks of remembering verbs that take être in the past. The first one is they're all pretty much verbs of movement. Okay, so if you think of the main verbs of movement: to go up, to enter, to fall over, to come, to go out, to leave, they're all verbs of movement, and that's a way of remembering Mrs. Vandetramp or être verbs. And the second way I like to remember them is if you remember one verb, it's probably very likely that its opposite or its binary opposite is there as well. For example, the verb to go is an être verb. So the opposite of to go is to stay. So the verb to stay is also a verb that is going to take être in the past. So there's two little tricks of remembering verbs that take être. So just to go through these, monter is to climb or to go up. Retourner is to return or to go back. Sortir is to go out or to enter, to go out. Venir is to come. Aller is to go. Naître is to, this is one that's not really a verb of movement. It's a bit of an exception. It's to be born. It does have a binary opposite, which we'll look at further down the list, is to die. So, but it's not really a verb. It's, I guess it's a verb of movement in the sense that you're being born into the world. Descendre is to go down, to get off. Entrer is to enter or to go in. Tomber is to fall. Rester is to stay. Arriver is to arrive. Mourir is to die, so its binary opposite would be naître, and partir is to leave. Okay, so there's your list in English of those verbs. You can always come back to this slide if you forget them or you need to know what they are. So how do we actually apply that to the past tense? Let's just go back to this slide here and make some notes down here. So let's take a verb, for example, one of our verbs was aller, which was to go. Now it's an ER verb, so we're going to follow this same structure in terms of the past participle. What is going to be different is the fact that it's an être verb. It's on the Mrs. Vandetramp list. So when we're using our auxiliary verb, we're looking at the orange ones here. So let's say I wanted to say I went instead of I go, so it's the past tense of this. We're going to take our pronoun, which is J apostrophe, or it can be je as well. So je. Now we're going to use our être verb here, suis. It's not je this time, it's je suis. And then we're going to look at what type of verb. It's an ER verb, and we're going to put an E accent on the end, like that. Je suis allé. Okay, so that is now correct. If it was j'ai allé, that would be a mistake, and it's wrong, so you wouldn't, you'd lose some marks for that in your GCSE. So we need to remember that aller is Mrs. Vandetramp. It takes être, so je suis allé. Just to do one more example here, if we think of the verb monter, monter is to go up. It's an ER verb, or let's do sortir because it's a different type of verb. It's an IR verb, and it's on the list of Mrs. Vandetramp. So we're still going to use être. So let's take we went out. So we use nous here. Now it's not avant this time. It's nous sommes. Nous sommes. And then it's an IR verb. We find our IR on here. The IR is going to change to an I. So nous sommes sortis. And I have put an S on there, and that's going to start confusing some people. I'm going to explain that now, as we're on that topic. It's to do with the agreement, but just to remember that we need the I there. And that's how we form the past tense with être verbs. The last part of the past tense that we need to know with être verbs, attention, means we need to be careful with one thing, is that Mrs. Vandetramp, so être verbs must agree with their pronoun. Not avoir. If they take avoir, you don't need to think about any agreement. Adding an extra E, adding an extra S, doesn't matter. However, with these particular verbs, Mrs. Vandetramp verbs, it's really important that they do agree with whoever is actually doing that verb. What does that mean by agree? Well, for example, I'll make some notes down here for you. If it's masculine singular, for example, he went. Il est aller, like that. Now, agreement means we need to add something to the end of it, and it needs to match this person, the subject. Now, this is he. It's masculine singular. It's one person, and it's a boy, so it's he. So we don't actually need to add anything onto the end of this. Nothing. There's another example there. He went to the supermarket. Nothing on the end. However, if it's feminine singular, let's say we want to do she went. Now, something's going to happen here. This is not going to change, but the end of the past participle, we're going to add that extra E on the end because the person doing the verb is she, which is feminine. It's one person, so we add that E there. Elle est allée au supermarché. She went to the supermarket. If you didn't have that E, there would be a mistake on there. Masculine plural. So if we had, for example, nous, which is we, but we would be a group of boys, so it would just be masculine. However, there's more than one, we add that extra S on the end. And lastly, don't know if you can see that, it's cut off, so I'll just write it. If it's a group of girls, and it's plural, so they, but they're all girls, elles sont allées, they went. There's our normal structure there, but we're going to add an E and an S, both of those, because it's a group of girls, it's feminine, and there's more than one, so it's got the agreement there. So that is how we agree être verbs in the past tense. Right, so we've come to our exercise for you guys to practice. So just going to go through the instructions first before I want you to pause the video. Now this task is actually designed to practice everything that we've gone through in part 1 and part 2. So if you can do this and you do really well in this task, it's a really good indication that you have got a good grasp of the past tense and all its complexities. So it's a text. You have up here a gap, and before the gap you have an infinitive verb, and you have the pronoun or the subject. It may not be a pronoun, it could be a subject, like here, mes parents would be my parents, which the equivalent would be they, so it'd be ils with the S. So be careful with that. So basically what you need to do is there's going to tend to be two parts to this. You're going to need to put an auxiliary verb and a past participle. Here's your infinitive. The ones with the stars on them are slightly more tricky. And if you do want to have something else to do, you can translate the text into English as well. And I will be going through this all in 1 second. So now is your time to pause the video, have a go at that, and just after that, resume, and we will go through the feedback for this activity. Right, welcome back. We're going to start going through this activity now, and hopefully trying to explain, if you did make mistakes, I'll try and explain, where you went wrong perhaps, and you can try and correct your mistakes. So the first one, le week-end dernier, I'm actually going to translate this at the same time, so that will cover this task as well. Le week-end dernier is last weekend. Regarder is to watch. So we wanted to hear I watched un feuilleton à la télé. So I watched a soap on TV. So we're going to need our we're going to get rid of this, and it's actually going to be, I'll just write the whole thing. It's going to be j'ai, okay, and it's an ER verb, it's regular, and it's going to take avoir, so that's why we've got j'ai, and it's going to be regard. Replace the ER with an E accent, and that is correct. J'ai regardé un feuilleton à la télé, and I loved it. Okay, so that's the it there, that's the I, and that's to love. It's an ER verb. It's je is the subject, so it's I. So again, it's going to be je. In fact, it's going to be je l'ai. We're going to take off this E here. Je l'ai adoré, like that. Alors, whereas my sister preferred l'émission pour les jeunes is the programs for children. So now we don't have a pronoun, we've got a subject, my sister. So what you have to think is, who's doing that verb? My sister, I, you, he, she, we, or they. Well, my sister would be she, so that would be the equivalent of elle. So ma sœur, so what goes with elle? Préféré takes avoir, so it's a. Préféré. like that, E accent on the end. Now you might ask yourself, hang on a minute, don't I need to put an E on the end of that because it's a girl? No, we don't make that mistake because it takes avoir. All the verbs that take avoir do not, and that which is the majority of them, do not need to agree the past participle. Right, let's continue. Mes parents, my parents. Now this is a negative here, as we learnt, so we're going to have the auxiliary verb in here. So this is the equivalent of they, ils. Now you might say it could be elles, but my parents tend to be a dad and a mum, so there's a male in that group, and therefore it would be ils. So we'd have, and this is going to cut off to an apostrophe, ils n'ont pas. And then we've got regarder with an E accent on there. La télé à part les infos. They didn't watch the TV apart from the news. Ça a été. So this is an irregular past participle. Ça a été barbant. Or we could also use c'était, which is probably more accurate. C'était, which is the imperfect tense, which we haven't discussed in this tutorial. C'était barbant. Le samedi après-midi, on the Saturday afternoon. Now, retrouver is actually it's the same as it's rentrer. It's actually a Mrs. Vandetramp verb. Retrouver, no, is not a Mrs. Vandetramp verb. So j'ai retrouvé mes copains. Accent on there. J'ai retrouvé mes copains en ville et nous, now we've got a Mrs. Vandetramp verb, so it's going to be nous sommes allés. Now this is where we need to think about the agreement. Now we is a group here, so we're going to have an S on there. We don't know necessarily if it's masculine or feminine. In fact, yeah, it could be masculine because there's no E on there, but we would just, let's put an E in brackets, but definitely an S on there. Au centre sportif, où nous, faire is going to take avoir, so nous avons, but it is an irregular past participle. It's nous avons fait de l'athlétisme. Jouer, again, takes avoir, E accent, nous avons joué, so we have played. We have also, okay, so we've got aussi here, sorry, so just going to get rid of that. Nous avons aussi joué, so when you've got a word like this, it's actually going to go in between the avant and jouer. Nous avons aussi joué au volley, we also played volleyball. Le soir, rentrer is a Mrs. Vandetramp verb, so it's going to be use être, je suis, rentré. And again, it could be a potential E. We don't know if this person is a male or female. I went home with my family. We ate at a restaurant. So it's manger takes avoir. So nous avons mangé. Don't need the agreement because it's avoir au restaurant. Et c'était would be more accurate here. Non, ça a été. C'était délicieux. It was delicious. Le dimanche, on Sunday, now choisir is an IR verb. It's regular, and it takes avoir, so it's going to be j'ai. What do we do with IR verbs? We take off the IR and we add an I. J'ai choisi de rester chez moi. I chose to stay at mine because, now this is a little bit tricky because we haven't actually covered it in this, but it would be car je me suis reposé. Potentially. The reason is because if the verb is reflexive, it automatically takes être in the past tense. Écouter is takes avoir. It's a regular verb, so it's going to be j'ai écouté. I listened to music on my iPod and I read. Now lire is an irregular past participle. J'ai lu un livre. It's not j'ai lu. J'ai lu un livre. I read a book. J'ai aussi envoyé. I also sent text messages on my phone. And my little brother. Now rester. So this is my little brother. It's the equivalent of he. So it's going to be. It's an être verb, by the way. So est resté. Now we need to think about the agreement here. And it's a boy, it's singular, no agreement needed. À la maison et a fait back to avoir and our irregular past participle. And so my little brother stayed at home and made a lot of noise. You can't see that, but it says playing on the PlayStation. He is really énervant, is annoying. Okay, so that is the corrections for that task. I hope you are starting to understand and confidently be able to use the past tense with all its complexities and variables. And I hope that this tutorial has really helped you to get a grip with the past tense. Thank you very much for listening, and that's all from me today for the past tense.